Diary entry number 12. Alone. I'm a soft-spoken survivor, and this is a Nervous System Diaries entry. There are different types of loneliness. There's the loneliness of being by yourself, and then there's the loneliness of being surrounded by people and still having nobody you can trust. This chapter is called Alone. Not because I physically spent all my time by myself. Not because I had reached a point in my life where I truly felt like I had no one. After my first miscarriage, something changed inside of me. I knew I couldn't keep living the way I had been living. I knew I needed a plan. The problem was that leaving an abuser isn't as simple as walking out the door. When you've already tried to leave once and you nearly paid for it with your life. Every decision becomes calculated. Every move becomes strategic. My brain had shifted completely into survival mode. I no longer thought about the future. I was thinking about how to make it through today. Then an opportunity appeared. The people who had been coming in and out of number one's uncle's house had found a place to rent around the corner. Eventually they lost that place, so I took it as an opportunity to get out of his uncle's house. At the time it felt like the best opportunity I had been given in a really long time, and for a little while it actually was. For the first time in years, I got a small glimpse of the person I used to be before abuse became my normal. I worked on a farm. I babysat children. I worked in a roadside farmer's market. I fed cows. I planted a garden. I laughed with customers. I made friends. And every night I'd come home to puppy. Those moments didn't erase the abuse, but they reminded me that there was still a person underneath it. A person who still loved animals. A person who still enjoyed working hard. A person who still smiled when life gave her a reason to. Looking back now, I realize those moments mattered more than I knew, because they were quietly reminding me that I was still me, even though I had forgotten it for a while. The landlord and his wife had 2 children. I helped with them when she wanted to go to the store or something. Their income was fully the farms they had. I think they had 4 lots. Number one would go out with the landlord and do farm stuff, like pick vegetables or help mow the wheat down. Of course, number one would get a little pocket money from doing this and vanish for weeks at a time. But at least this time, I was alone in the house. Eventually, I had to do farm stuff because that's what gave the pocket money. Everything else just went on the books towards rent. I baled hay. I drove a tractor. Even though my back was jacked up, I still managed to throw bales of hay into the barn. I continued to babysit their kids, and during the spring through the summer, I worked in their farmer's market on the roadside stand. I'm not going to lie, this was my favorite part. There were 2 cows that stayed in the gate next to that barn. I could feed them and pet them, and those were the best parts of my days. I also had a garden on the property where I was staying. Puppy and I would tend to that. She'd lay out there, run the wild turkeys off, and for the first time I could bring her inside at night. We had such a bond. She was indeed my best friend. Number one would come and go as he decided, which honestly kept me safe for longer. My car had gotten repoed since I couldn't pay it, so he was way into more shady stuff than I think. He had gotten so many extra women that he could use to get things from. Funny to think back now that I had gotten so used to him disappearing that it didn't even faze me. I worked on the farm, played with the cows, and made friends with anyone who stopped by the roadside market that I was working in. It was good until it wasn't. My back was hurting more, and being heat intolerant made it for a hard time for me, plus having to lie to the landlords as to the whereabouts where number one was. It just became super draining and taxing on me. I know I was only making enough to cover most of the rent, but not the electric. Number one never contributed to it in any way. After the first few weeks of him doing that, he realized that he was too good for that type of work. Meanwhile, I knew it wasn't that, but that he couldn't score drugged working on the farm. He'd have friends, which I never saw because he'd walk a ways to be picked up, so I assumed they were other women. When he would come back, he'd be so high that he was sick. He spent most of the time in the bathrooms throwing up. He would also force himself on me a lot more at night. One night I was sleeping with Puppy in the bed. I usually just left number one out in the living room on the couch where he had passed out. I would be woken up with him in fits of rage, beating me. After he'd do that, he'd force himself on me. I became pregnant again, but it didn't last. Another time I was taking a bath and he came in there and tried to drown me. He had started staying around the house a lot more. He must have burned all his connections, was all I could think. He would work with the landlord while I worked in the market. Little did I know, people started knowing me and would stop and say hi and buy things from the market. I also got a take on what I would sell. I wish I had enough guts to tell the landlord not to pay me in front of number one because he just took all of it, saying I owed it to him. I would also have to either walk or ride a bike if it didn't have a flat to the store, which was 2 miles away, so 4 miles in total. Heat sensitive and back problems. I'd almost kill over, but he told me I would do that or get beat. He was usually doing drug deals at the house or something. He only went with me a handful of times. On my walks, people knew me from the market. They'd offer me rides if they saw me. Number one didn't like that. He told me about another store and start going a different way. I went 2 times that direction. Imagine being abused with already starting health issues on the bike in the middle of nowhere, going to the store for your abuser to get him to his tobacco dip and an energy shot. Then one day you're on your bike. I want to say I was really good with my surroundings, and this almost happened in a slow motion. Out of the corner of my eye, I see a woman in a trailer open her door. The dog flies out across the yard and rips me from my bike. It was a pit bull. I'm in the middle of the road screaming at the lady to get her dog off of me because I was bleeding so bad trying to pry the dog's jaws loose. Just when I was giving up, a truck stopped and helped me. They called 911, drove me back to the house. They knew where I lived because they knew I worked in the market. When I got to the house, number one came out and said, "Oh my God," not because he was worried about me, but because I ruined his drug deal. That was what he was about to do. The people told him an ambulance was on the way. The landlord also came over because, like I said, I was in the middle of nowhere. I had to be transported to the hospital. The x-ray showed that the dog had punctured through my calf muscle and its teeth had reached my bones on both my shin and in my calf in 3 places. I had 8 puncture wounds. I needed a strong medicine for just in case the dog had rabies. The doctor told me if I had been a child, they would have lost their leg. It was so bad. It hurt really bad. The hospital gave me a prescription for pain meds and antibiotics that I needed. The landlord had driven number one to the hospital to check on me and to get my meds filled. Oh boy, was he mad. Not only did I ruin his drug deal, I was now having to get him to spend his money on me for the dog bite. The Lord knew he had funds because he had given him money earlier that day for the work he had done, so in ways he couldn't lie. I went inside on my crutches to get my meds. Upon coming back outside for the ride back home, we were in the back of the truck. He said, "What all did you get?" I told him, and then he told me how I ruined his night and that I owed him my pain medication. I had gotten Loratabs, those are his favorite. Even though he made fun of me because of the low dose they were, he told me, "You don't want me to be angry at you, do you?" And I said, "No, of course not." He said, "Then you will let me have those." So I did, just so I could rest. I couldn't do much of anything for 6 weeks. I had stitches and drains in my legs. My legs were bruised from my kneecaps down to my toes. I healed all of that with no more doctor visits, no meds, basically alone with Puppy. Yes, I was healed, but at what cost? Nothing changed. The electric was off. Number 1 once again left. Most of my abuse happened at night, so I couldn't sleep very well due to the extreme fear I had. It was at this time I went into a very dark place. I didn't want to live like this anymore. I didn't know how to escape. I just didn't want to be anymore. Puppy had become my confidant, my everything, the one I talked to, the one I shared with. A few months prior, I had begun self-harm because it was an outlet for me, since I wasn't allowed to show outward emotions other than happy. Fake happy is all I knew. It caught up with me though. All that holding in feelings, I had had enough. I couldn't live like this anymore. I was so very alone. I had no one. I downed a whole bottle of aspirin and self-harm. Puppy sat down in front of me, in my blood, while I was going through this moment. She stared through to my soul. In that moment, I felt her as if she was speaking into my heart. Her big eyes looking at me and then cried with me. When I saw her tears, I stopped. I couldn't leave my best girl. If it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be here today. That night was the lowest point of my entire life. I was exhausted, broken, alone. I didn't know how to escape. I didn't know how to fix anything. I didn't even know if I wanted to keep trying. Puppy sat there in front of me while I cried. She looked me straight in my eyes, and for a moment I felt like she could see every bit of my pain I was carrying. I know some people will say she was just a dog, but for anyone who has ever loved an animal knows better. She wasn't just a dog. She was my family. She was my best friend, my soulmate, my reason to get up every morning. When I saw her looking at me, I realized something. If I gave up, I would be leaving her behind, and I just couldn't do that. Not to her. Not after she stayed beside me through everything. So I stopped. I chose one more day, and then another, and then another. Looking back now, I realized this was the moment everything began to change. Not because I was suddenly free, not because the abuse stopped, not because life magically got better, but for me, something inside of me shifted. For the first time, I stopped thinking about surviving the day and started thinking about ways to escape. A tiny spark of hope was still buried somewhere deep inside of me, and from that moment on, it started to protect me. And because if Puppy could keep believing in me, then maybe it was finally time I started believing in myself too. And that's where this chapter will end and the next chapter begins. Until next time, this has been a Soft-Spoken Survivor, and you've listened to a Nervous System Diary.